Hey there, welcome to First Look. Thanks for being here this week as we keep moving, as I try to move myself with this chair. But also, just we keep moving down this path of Lent. And I love Lent because you learn a lot about yourself whenever you're willing to be a little introspective. And I learned a lot about you this past week, just in your capacity for unbelievable graciousness and kindness as we had our little celebration. And thank you again. See the other video I did today for the official thank you for that. But it was a good week, and actually the highlight was that we had a baptism for August Perry, which I gotta say was an adorable child and a wonderful family. And it was always a blessing to be able to talk about and be a part of baptism. And I think one of the things that it's one of those step back and realize moments when you're doing this of how unique that is to be able to participate in that. And so you all have heard my speech before on your participation in that and the promises that we make to each other. And that's the part of baptism I really love, is the saying yes to people, because we don't have enough moments where we say yes to each other. So this week we continue to think about and reflect on where we've gone astray. You know, we're doing this whole confession thing, and see where this one takes us. This week is brought to you also by Instant Coffee, not only because I'm lazy, which I am, but because I kind of like the idea more and more of instant coffee. I feel like I haven't given it a fair shot in my life. So here's your challenge for this week. Do you have a brand of instant coffee that you think is the bee's knees? That you think, once you drink this, you'll never go back? Because that one right there that I have, that I bought at Shop and Save, is Maxwell House. My gut says that someone is making a primo instant coffee, and I want to know what it is, and I want you to tell me. So help me out, friends, because I got to have it. I need you to help me. All right. This is John, and it's chapter 9. And we're going to be talking about blindness, because that's what the chapter's about, not just because I feel like it. This is a longer story, which I'm going to have to shrink down for you because, you know, we only have so much time. But it's a really interesting story. And I think that it's just the metaphor and the bigger ideas that are in it. You know, it's one of those stories. It's not really about a blind man, but it's about how we're all blind. You can do that metaphor to death if you want to. I mean, you can really, I think it can really like oversaturate our thinking, and, you know, we can almost ignore it. I was going to say turn a blind eye to it, but no. So, but it can do that. I think that this story almost feels so typically Jesus, so typically Bible, that it's like you would almost pass by it without even noticing. But there's a lot to it, and I want to focus in on one piece of it that I find intriguing. But, you know, we're going to look at blindness and what that means. You know, and I think it also really pairs well with not only the story that we did for this last week, which is the woman at the well story, but I think it pairs well with what I was trying to do with it. Because what I was talking about was the title of my sermon yesterday was how I contribute, me personally, to the isms of the world: racism, sexism, really any kind of misogyny, or, you know, any of those isms that plague us. And our personal need, not only our collective need, but our personal need to recognize our contributions to that and how I personally benefit from the world the way it's set up because of who I am. And grappling with that a little bit. I know many of you have, and many of you know what I'm talking about. But it is a difficult thing because we don't like to look at ourselves as being contributors to a problem. But many of us are, and in ways that we're not recognizing all the time. And actually, so when you pivot into the blindness aspect of this passage, you can see how those two kind of connect. And that's what we've been trying to do during this season is think about what we confess and why we confess them and what the purpose of that is and how that can be a healing thing. And recognizing where we have gone astray is the biggest part of it, I think. And then trying to listen and do something about it. So, chapter 9 of John talks about a blind man who is healed by Jesus. And then, because of the nature of all of that, there's some questioning that happens. The Pharisees are taken aback by what's happening, and they question what's happening. They question the validity, and there's a conversation that happens. And so part of that we're going to read, but here's what you should do. You should pause for a moment and read verses 1 through 12, just to remind yourself of the story. So this is the part where Jesus is healing someone of blindness, and they're trying to figure out whose sin is responsible for the blindness, because that's why you'd be blind, at least in the context that we're in. That blindness was a result of sin. Was it his sin or the sin of his parents? And so there's mud on covering his eyes that Jesus uses, and then it's washed away. Okay, so the Pharisees question what's happening here. I'm going to start with 13, and then we're going to work our way down. And we may skip or paraphrase a few verses here and there, but that's what we're going to be focused on here, is the second 2/3 of the story. So starting in 13 of, again, John chapter 9. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was the Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes, so that is a part you have to think about. The fact that it's a Sabbath day and you shouldn't be healing on the Sabbath day. He said to them, he put mud on my eyes, and then I washed, and now I see. So some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath. But others say, how can a man who is a sinner perform such signs? So let me pause there for just 1 second. One of those things about John is that John uses the term signs all the time. You may remember me saying this, but I think because we don't talk about it all the time, it's one of those things that's worth saying again. So you and I are used to hearing the term miracle. John uses the term signs very specifically for this reason. Again, miracles could be like a magic trick. There's something that is meant to amaze, but that's about it. That's the focus, is to amaze you, to make the person look really powerful, right? I'm doing this miracle to show my benevolence or to show my greatness, right? A sign there's a prophetic element to it, intentionally, which is why he's called matching that with the term prophet. He is a prophet, it says. They're saying that specifically because the reason for the miracle isn't the miracle in and of itself. It's what it points to. It points to God. It points to God's kingdom. It points to goodness and mercy in the world. something greater than the moment. And that's the point, is that John uses the term signs so that we understand that it's not just about the act, but what the act leads to or represents. So just in case you ever noticed that, or you've ever wondered, I wonder why he uses that term. That's what the term is trying to get us to see. Okay. I'm going to pick up in 18. The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered him, "You know that this is our son and that he was born blind, but we do not know how it is that now he can see, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him, because he's of age. He will speak for himself." So his parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. A little pressure, a little bit of, we don't know. I mean, go ahead, just ask him. That says a lot about us right there. Not about the parents so much, but about church. What kinds of, pressures do we put on each other? What kind of, where does the church do something similar? Is it guilt trips? What does church do? Like that, those are things for us to be thinking about as we kind of talk about this. All right. 24. So for the second time, they called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, "Give the glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." And he answered, "I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know is that though I was blind, now I see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" He knew they didn't want to become his disciples. He's just baiting them. Okay. Then they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man being Jesus, we do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, "You were born entirely in sins, and are you trying to teach us?" And then they drove him out. Let me pause there because we got to read the rest of it, which I want to focus on. But if we're the church, that's a lot to unpack. Something wonderful happened to me. All you want to focus on is who had the authority. Was there a committee meeting? Did anyone authorize this? Was this a relevant blessing? Was God involved? We didn't know about it. We didn't sanction it. Can it really be a faithful thing? Because it didn't follow our process. It didn't follow our theology. It didn't follow our doctrine. So that must mean that it falls outside of goodness or something. And the blind man is like, you have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. You're not seeing the bigger picture here. And then they question this person's integrity and his ability to think clearly or logically or morally. That's a lot for the church to unpack. our relevancy in culture, our relevancy to our neighbors, our relevancy to a new generation. You know, who are we? Where does our authority lie? Can we even claim one for another generation? That's a real question. Our relevancy to the world around us as basically you're not conforming to the way that we think the world should be, so you must be bad. Outside sinner, you're the blind one. You've been the blind one this whole time. And yet you're going to come in here and try to tell us, you know, and this formerly blind person is like, I'm not really sure that you're getting this. You're not as relevant in this situation as you think you are, and you should be. Because if his parents were a part of the synagogue and didn't want to be kicked out, it means that they have a connection to their church, right? And they didn't want their church they didn't want to lose that connection. They didn't want to lose that status. And so they didn't want to go against what the church said and speak up for their son, because they might lose their place in society, which is unfair to them. Maybe you'll feel a little bit bad that they weren't willing to do that, but they were still put in the position that maybe they felt like they had to. We have a lot of healing to do with people. And I see that all the time. And they're in private conversations. And sometimes they're private conversations with people that I have here. I mean, who are members here. And sometimes they're visitors, or sometimes they're people that I know outside of the church. Because I still have people I have people in my life who genuinely don't understand what I do for a living. I mean, they really, really don't. Because they don't understand what is it about? What is it actually about? They get the basics, like you do Easter, you do Christmas, and you preach and teach, and there's the Bible's involved, but I don't actually understand why you're doing this. Which, of course, to you and I, you know, if you're watching this, you're probably like, well, you know, then they should come to church and figure it out. Well, I get why you're saying that, but they also, what is the church's function within the world, and how, you know, as a force for something that is positive and relevant. You know, if church is outside of your experience, it can be a puzzling thing. It was for me until, you know, I started coming, but I didn't just start coming because I was curious. Relationships developed that. People pursued me for who I was, and that made the difference. A lot for us to think about is my point. Okay. So this is verse 35. John 9:35. Here we go. Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And he answered, "And who is he, sir? Tell me, so that I may believe in him." Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshipped him. Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say, 'We see,' your sin remains." That's harsh. That hurts. All right, let's talk about that for a second. our natural inclination, I think, especially if you've been doing this for a while, especially if you're someone who's trying to understand their faith, trying to do the best they can, worshiping because it means something to you, being a part of this community because it means something to you, finding sanctuary here, is to feel like when I'm here, I feel like I know a little bit more about who I am and where I want to be. And what we discover is that we can't learn our way sometimes into faithfulness, for lack of a better term. And that Jesus is asking for a sense of vulnerability, I guess. All of the people in that story had to work on and consider how they were trusting God and what they put their trust in. Jesus wanted the disciples to trust him. Jesus wanted this man who was blind to trust him. The Pharisees didn't know what to trust. The Pharisees didn't want to feel like or experience vulnerability, or didn't want to be seen as fools or as ignorant. They questioned the blind man, the one who was blind. They questioned his parents. The parents didn't know who to rely on. They knew the community. They knew their synagogue. They didn't want to be, excommunicated. All of those things where people were trying to figure out, who do I lean on and where do I go? And of course, the easy kind of like children's sermon answer is that you lean on Jesus, right? And I could end there. But you and I absolutely know that that is not as easy as it sounds. Sometimes it feels that way, for sure. But the things that we are often blind to are the things that we want to be blind to, that we do not want to think about. Sometimes those are relationships. Sometimes those are whole groups of people, whole situations, parts of society that we write them off as bad, or we write them off as dumb, or we write them off as irrelevant, or whatever. And we do that personally, we do that corporately, we do that, in our politics, we do all of that. Because investing in the other is hard. It's hard work. And it's the reason that we have church, to be honest with you, because it's easy to invest in a group of people that all look and think like you. But it's a whole different thing to open yourself up to the experience of other people. It's messier. It's harder. But I do think it's a part of what we're trying to understand. We don't understand the experience of other people. We don't trust the experience of other people. We don't listen to the experience of other people enough, because we categorize them and we put them over there. Whoever that is for you, young or old, black or white, whatever it happens to be for you. We don't want to know their experience because it's foreign or scary or whatever. And we don't want to have to rethink everything. The Pharisees didn't want to have to rethink everything. Or, it's a painful thing to have to reinvent yourself. Reinvent your world. It just is. And some of you know that firsthand. In this passage, you can take the blindness element as far as you want it to go, but at the end of the day, you are responsible for your own blindness in this sense. Usually, we ignore the things that we don't want to look at. Now, that's different than some of the ways that we could talk about blindness, where we leave others in the dark, or someone's kind of their ignorance, something they need to learn. But I think more often than not, our blindness is because is our responsibility, and that's a really hard thing to kind of grapple with. So that's part of what I was trying to talk about yesterday in the isms part. That just recognizing that, what in me perpetuates or holds the systems together, that, the systems that you and I are a part of, that include and are, elements of, large elements of racism or sexism or homophobia or whatever. All of those systems benefit someone and don't benefit other people. And we can kind of turn a blind eye to that if we want to, and just act like, well, we're all equal and it's all fine. But it's not, because all you really have to do is talk to people who have a very different experience than you, or who are willing to look at something that you don't want to look at, and they will tell you a different story. And just saying nuh-uh doesn't accomplish anything. It might make you feel better. It might make you feel safer. It might make you feel like you're doing okay, but that's just blindness. And again, just the step of recognizing that doesn't make anything better for those who are marginalized. It's a first step, but then you got to do the next thing. And figuring out the next thing usually means not rushing to do something, but spending a lot more time listening to people, which you can still do when you're blind. So that's a benefit. That's all I got. That's what I don't know where I'm going for this week. It's a big story. Look at the whole thing. Thanks for being you. Thanks for being blind with me occasionally. Thanks for opening my eyes to different things. And I hope that we can continue to do that together. I hope you have a fantastic week. Thank you again for all the ways that you're so supportive of me and each other and the staff. Thanks for being just a part of this. And I will see you next time for another First Look. Take care.